Good morning, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're coming from. I'm Lauren Howman, and today I wanted to talk about insulin resistance. Today is day 5 of my extended water fast, and just to get the medical disclaimer out of the way, we're going to do this every day. Excuse me. I am in no way acting as a practitioner in this water fasting journey. I am a nurse practitioner, but to you, I am just a girl on YouTube. And if you want to follow me, that's great. If you want to start fasting, that's great, but always consult with your medical provider before starting any exercise or diet regimen. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way. So I'm on day 5. Things are going pretty well over here. I did not lose any weight on the scale last night. I woke up exactly the same at 194.6. And to some people that would be discouraging, but I learned in a good way, I guess, was it February? I think it was February. I lost like 4 or 5 pounds throughout the month, and that was it. And I fasted like a lot during February, like probably 10 or 15 days out of the 28 or whatever it was. So I would have been super discouraged, but I decided to measure myself at the end of January, and I'm glad I did because I lost 18 inches in February and lost like almost 0 pounds. So now I know that to really know what your body is doing when it's fasting, you should measure and weigh. So weighing is not your only way to have a victory. So I know that if I'm not losing weight, then my body is probably doing a little autophagy, which is when your cells eat up the old proteins and get rid of inches instead of pounds. So I am really struggling today with my anyway, so I was talking to my sister on the phone this morning, and she said I should go into insulin resistance and try to explain that. And I came up with a really good analogy. So I wanted to share that with you guys, and I hope it all makes sense because in my head it makes a lot of sense. So insulin resistance, couldn't come at a better time because I had 3 patients last week who were like really diabetic and were really not doing well with their diabetes medications. And I am not a diabetes specialist, so I'm not even able to like really go into anything with them other than the standard medical garb that we are all taught. Cut your carbs and watch your sugars and lose weight. So what I found last week with those 3 patients, now that I'm getting into a lot of diabetes research and reading and learning how it all works, I'm finding that it's not the patient's fault. And this goes back to dieting and being fat too. It's not really the patient's fault. Doctors are telling us the wrong things. And that's unfortunate. But we talked about yesterday on my YouTube video, the eat less, move more, how that does not work. But for 100 years, we've known that doesn't work in the literature, and we're still going by that. And that's what we're still telling our patients. So, I'll reach out there and say, do keto, because keto will work for you. And it kind of goes along the lines of fasting and reducing carbs and thus reducing your insulin output. But I'm not allowed to go much further than that. But what I'm finding is that it's not the patient's fault. It is, for diabetes, it's lack of understanding of the disease process, lack of understanding of what the insulin medication does for you, and lack of understanding of what the food that you put into your body does for you. So that being said, I started my water fasting journey because I wanted to see if I could reduce my fasting blood sugar. My fasting blood sugar has been high for a few years, and I finally decided I should do something about that because I knew I was headed towards diabetes in the long run. I was gestationally diabetic, and those people have I think, and I don't know, I've said this before, I think it's a 25% increased risk of having type 2 diabetes later in life, but 25% may not be right. It might be 75, and I don't remember. So look that up if you're interested, and I'll try to remember to look it up so I can get back to you guys on that figure and be more sure of my number. But either way, 25 or 75%, either one of those numbers is too high for me, and I don't want to be diabetic. So that's why I started fasting, and it worked ridiculously well. For the first month of fasting, I posted my weights and my morning blood sugars every morning, and I went from like 105 down to like 83 during fasting. And my blood sugars now that I've been fasting for a few months, my morning blood sugars stay below 95, which before they were all the way up to 125. So now I am in a total non-pre-diabetic mode. I am not anywhere close to diabetes as far as my blood sugars go. Blood sugars do not tell the whole story, but that's how you get diagnosed with diabetes. So I'm out of that category now, so that's great. So insulin resistance, the best way I can explain it to you guys, there's been several analogies that I've read about, and the one I like best is the idea of packing a suitcase. So packing a suitcase, your clothes are your food, your carbs, and your glucose. Your suitcase is your fat cell, and your insulin is the person packing the suitcase and getting everything to fit inside. So when you start out in life, you have plenty of room in your fat cells. And so you eat the food, it goes into the fat cell, the suitcase, and then your insulin, or no, excuse me, your, hang tight, I already messed up my analogy. So you eat the food and you have glucose. Your glucose needs to get into the fat cell, which is your suitcase. Your insulin gets produced in response to that need and comes and pushes the glucose into the suitcase and zips it up. No problem. What happens though when you're trying to pack 80 outfits into one suitcase? So over time you keep packing more glucose and more glucose into the fat cell, which is just stored energy, but if you never access the stored energy, it just stays put in the fat cell. So now you've got this suitcase and you're now trying to pack for like a 8-day trip, or no, let's call it a year trip in one suitcase. And so you get all your stuff in and you can't get it zipped. Your insulin is produced in response to get all that glucose into the fat cell, and it can't do its job. It's trying. So now you get your husband and you say, come sit on this. That's more insulin. Your husband is more insulin coming to the scene. And he sits on it and you zip it up. Great. The next day you need to add 2 more outfits. So you eat more food, those are your outfits, that's your glucose. I hope this makes sense, guys. If it doesn't, just send me a message and I'll come up with a different analogy for you. But so the next day you decide that your trip is going to be extended. You bought 2 new dresses that you really want to fit into the suitcase. Now you've got to unzip it, first of all. And now you've got to put these 2 new suitcases in. You call your husband back over. You and him are acting as the insulin, trying to push all of this glucose into the cell that's already too full. So you call your husband over, he sits on it, you still can't zip it. So you call your daughter or whoever, and now she's more insulin coming to the scene. So you're producing more and more insulin to do the same job of pushing these clothes, the glucose, into your fat cell, the suitcase. So all 3 of you are trying to push all of this glucose into the fat cell, the clothes into the suitcase, and you get the job done. This is what leads to insulin resistance, because you're packing more and more glucose into one fat cell that's already too full. So the next day you eat more food, you need more clothes into your suitcase, more glucose into the fat cell. And now it's taking, your insulin is getting produced at an even higher level. You're needing, let's say 4 insulins, 4 people to get the fat in, or get to the glucose into the fat cell. So at this point, let's say no matter how much insulin you produce, it's still not working. That's when you get high blood sugar. That's when you no longer can push your glucose into the cells and it stays in the bloodstream. You prick your finger and you have a high glucose. That's what leads to the diagnosis of prediabetes and diabetes. High blood sugar, persistently high blood sugar, because you're still eating, you're still trying to pack more clothes in, they can't go in, so now they're hanging out in the blood stream instead of getting into the suitcase. Does that make sense? So how do you reduce this? How do you get rid of insulin resistance? Well, I did it, and I want to share this with everybody because I want everybody to be diabetes free. And I'm really, like, I'm struggling right now so hard because I almost want to go back to school and become a diabetic educator so that I can do this mainstream. And I still don't even know if I would be able to, because it's not what's being taught. What's being taught right now is, oh, your blood sugars are persistently high, let's put you on insulin. What good does that do for you? Think about it this way. Now you're putting more insulin into your body from exogenous medication insulin. So you and all of your insulin that your pancreas could produce could not push more glucose into the fat cell, more clothes, and get it zipped into the suitcase. But now we're going to inject ourselves with insulin, and now we're going to get that suitcase zipped. But it doesn't fix the problem. The food is the problem, not the insulin production. Your body is still producing insulin. And by the way, guys, I'm talking only about type 2. Type 1 diabetics, do not listen to a word I say. Your problems are all completely different in every aspect, basically. So you inject this insulin, and now you are just calling more people to come over and get this suitcase zipped. But eventually you need more people. So now your doctor ups your insulin dosage. And I'm making these numbers up completely. Say we started out at 50 units. Now we're at 100. So we're taking twice as much insulin to get that same suitcase zipped. And yet our blood sugars are still going to remain high, because no matter how much insulin you have, the suitcase is only going to stay the same size. So if we don't get some of this energy out of the cells, then we're going to continue to have to use more insulin. And here's the kicker, something I just learned last week. I never really understood this in all of my years of practicing medicine, is that using insulin doesn't fix the problem, and you continue to get worse despite your blood sugars being okay by a finger prick. So let's say Sally Sue is taking 200 units of insulin a day. She pricks her finger and her insulin's 99. Wonderful, your blood sugar is great. But what's happening is your insulin and the exogenous insulin that you use, that you inject yourself with, eventually gets smart and it wants to keep the blood sugar low, and since it can't pack anything else into that same suitcase, it starts using suitcases that don't usually hold glucose. So it starts putting glucose in your eye cells, in your blood vessels, in your all sorts of liver, pancreas. It starts storing glucose where it's not supposed to, that biologically those cells are not supposed to do that job. And that's why you have diabetics who have, even if they've been compliant, their blood sugars look good, 20 years after they've been using insulin, they're getting amputations because their blood flow to their leg has completely stopped and their leg is completely dead and they have to have it amputated. That's why diabetics lose eyesight, because they've got glucose in their eye cells and in their eye vessels and all of those things that go with the eyes, and it's not supposed to be there, but your body is just trying to stuff glucose wherever it can, and your fat cells are too stuffed full of it. So this has already gone on for longer than I wanted it to, and I'm supposed to be getting ready to leave to go on an excursion with my kids and my kids' cousins to go to like a jungle gym thing because it's raining outside. So let me bring it back, reel it back, and get this talk over with. So how do you reduce insulin resistance and reverse insulin resistance and reverse diabetes? You stop putting glucose in and you stop producing so much insulin. So the less glucose you put in, the less insulin you produce. So you become sensitive to the insulin again. If you stop stuffing things in the suitcase and you actually start pulling things out of the suitcase, you now don't need as much insulin to get that suitcase zipped. So fasting is how you do that. The keto diet is how you do that. If you don't eat carbs and you don't eat sugar and you go for extended periods of time, even 2-3 days, or even just an intermittent fasting regimen where you fast for certain hours of the day and you don't have insulin production, when you do eat glucose, you are much more sensitive to insulin's workload, how well they pack a suitcase basically. So I was insulin resistant, and I'm sorry, I've got all kinds of funkiness going on in my throat today. I'm getting sick, I believe, but anyway, we'll move on. Stop eating and get the energy that you have stored out and use it as energy. Those fat cells are there for you to use in famine. I've talked about this before, but that's a biological thing that your body does, because in the old days there was famine, there was feast and famine. So there were times when you would have no food and you would not eat, and so your body at that point would switch over into ketosis. You would start pulling fat from your blood cells and you would start using that for energy. So you can do the same thing even though we're not in the middle of a famine, but you can say, I'm not going to eat and I'm going to let my body reduce its stored fat levels. So you start using that fat, and now your fat cells are getting emptier. So when you do eat, you don't need very much insulin to get that glucose into those fat cells, because they're not jam-packed. They're not the suitcase that needs 5 people sitting on it and trying to zip it to get it closed. So that's how you reduce your insulin resistance, and that's how you beat diabetes. So I do extended fasting. I go anywhere from 2 to 5 to 8 days was my longest. Right now I'm on day 5 of an extended fast, seeing how long I can go. But you don't have to go that far. You can fast and do 1 meal a day. Even better if you do 1 meal a day and you keep it keto, where you eat really low carb and moderate protein, high fat. Because if anytime you go over 12 hours of not eating, you are going to be accessing your fat for energy. You may not go into ketosis, but you will be burning fat at a slow pace, but you're still pulling energy out of those fat cells rather than trying to stuff more into it. So I hope that all makes sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me at laurenhowman2, the number 2, at yahoo.com, or you can private message me on Facebook or Instagram, and let me know your thoughts. Does it make sense? And do you want to reduce your insulin resistance? If so, I can help you. We can talk about a plan that would work for you. I've got people on plans, and this is not a charged service either. I'm just talking with people and trying to help them out, okay? I've got people doing 1 meal a day. I've got people dry fasting for 3 days. I've got people fasting for 2 days and then eating a meal. Everybody has an individualized plan, and it's all working for everybody. I do a little bit more extreme because I find it easier to do all or nothing. Like, it's easier for me to just like not eat than it is to try to like plan a meal every 24 hours and I want to lose weight faster as well. But you don't have to do what I do to get the results that I'm getting. They might be a little bit slower, but it might be more doable for your life. So let me know if you have any questions. I really hope this makes sense. I am not sometimes the best person at making medical things really simple, but I want it to be super simple, like uber simple, because I want everybody to understand. And that's what your doctors aren't telling you. If you went and were diagnosed with diabetes and just thought you needed to take a medication, well, hot dang, that's great. Now you're fixed, but you're not. And they're not telling you that in 20 years you're going to start losing your vision, or that you have a high risk for amputation of one of your limbs because you're not getting perfused anymore because everything's all messed up with all this glucose. I think the education piece is going to be key to helping everybody get this under control. And if you are overweight, do not kid yourself. If you are fat, if you are obese, if you have 20 extra pounds on you, don't kid yourself. You are insulin resistant to some extent. So, gosh, this has gone on for way too long. It's been 16 minutes. I hope everybody has a good day. I hope this makes sense. Let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.